Hello YouTube, how's everyone doing? It's Professional here.
Why
Welcome back.
The Soviets were there.
Welcome back to my playthrough of Black Ops 1. I hope that you guys are enjoying this series. If you are, drop a like. We're going to continue from where we left off, but we're going to do numbers now. I'm going to talk a lot of history on this part also here. And I was originally planning on doing Hudson's outfit, but I really had no idea what Hudson was wearing on this part, so I instead decided to do Weaver. I hope I did a good job with Weaver's outfit.
Did you see the effects? We have the dossier that the defector gave you at MacV. We've ID'd all of Dragovich's men. Kopchenko, Steiner, Clarke. You know them. Masterminds of Project Nova.
Nova 6. Reznov called it Nova 6. Dragovich.
What do you know about Dr. Clarke? We know that Clarke was the chemical engineer who formulated Nova 6. Malignant narcissist, degenerate prodigy. Your handler, Jason Hudson, was sent to Kowloon to interrogate Clarke. Do you remember?
Why keep asking? You already know everything.
No, Mason, we don't know what the numbers mean. We don't know where they're broadcast from.
Well, why don't you ask Hudson? Kowloon was his mission. He interrogated Clarke.
Don't you morons get it? If you think your government-sponsored brutality intimidates me, you clearly don't know anything about Dragovich. I have nothing to gain by talking to you.
Think about what you have to lose.
We can do this all day. We got plenty of windows.
Or you can give us what we want and we guarantee your safety.
I'm already a dead man. I've been hunted across every corner of the globe. And if you found me, so will they. They know everything you know. They're probably on their way now.
Why?
Dragovich doesn't like loose ends. I've never even dealt with him directly. Only Steiner, the German.
What was the nature of your business?
I was hired to help stabilize certain volatile compounds.
What kind of compound?
Nova 6. A biochemical weapon.
You led them right to me! Get your head down! Gunfire ruptured the canister! What's your escape route? There's a hatch in the ceiling! This way!
You can see the Soviet Spetsnaz die from Nova 6 here.
Did you inhale the gas?
I don't think so.
You're lucky! Direct exposure is always safe! Spetsnaz inbound!
Damn, this part is, because you're using dual pistols until you pick something else up, it's,
Spetsnaz inbound! Granada! Which way? Up the stairs! To the roof! Он мой! Удерживай их огнем! Раненый!
Stone grenade!
Check the stairs! Right side window! Right side! Onto the roof!
now this part, look at this right here.
Short
This,
snipers! We need to get to the opposite.
the developers, Treyarch, they did a lot of research on the, throughout this entire game, not just in, literally almost every single mission, they've done a ton of historical researching. But anyways, about this place that Hudson and Weaver are finding Clarke in, this is Kowloon City, which is part of Hong Kong. And Hong Kong at this time was actually part of Britain, so Britain had occupied Hong Kong. This was in the 1960s. Mainland China was under a communist government. It still is, but Hong Kong was not part of China. Part of China at this time. Hong Kong technically is part of China today, but it has greater autonomy, and there's supposed to be better, better rights in Hong Kong, more freedom of expression, freedom of speech, more political parties besides the Communist Party. But in recent years, the Chinese communists have not been respecting that. But anyways, about this place that we're specifically in, this is actually called the Walled City in Kowloon, and this was a real place. This place does not exist anymore. This place is actually torn down, but basically, let me explain the history of Hong Kong to explain what's going on here. And that plane that actually showed up over, make sure that you remember that plane, because that plane is going to be very, very important. So, how did Britain actually acquire Hong Kong? How did Hong Kong become part of Britain? How it basically happened was, in the 1830s, the British Empire, they were expanding trade in Asia, and what happened was Britain was controlling India. India was, their biggest colony at that time, and Britain was trading with China. But Britain had a massive trade deficit with China. What happened was Britain was buying a lot of stuff from China, but China wasn't buying as much stuff from Britain. And China wasn't really interested in buying that much stuff from Britain. China at that time was a monarchy. It was ruled by the Qing dynasty. Now, Britain was thinking of things that they could, export to China. And this is one of the worst things that Britain has actually done in its history. What happened was you had British merchants that were in India, and they were growing opium, the drug. And what they would do is they would take this opium that they grew in India, and they would then sell it in China. So a lot of these merchants were British. Some of them were Indian. Some of them were from other British colonies. But they were doing this under Britain mainly. And what happened was, whenever these opium dealers would basically go into China and they would sell opium, they would get the Chinese addicted. It would cause, massive drug problems in China. And then Britain, they would actually tax the opium sales. So Britain was actually making money. So these drug dealers essentially were, these British drug dealers were going into China, selling tons of opium, getting the Chinese addicted, causing a drug crisis in China, and then Britain would tax that and make a ton of money from it. What happened was the Chinese rightfully got pissed about this. The Qing, monarchy, they got angry, and what they basically did was they seized opium ships and they destroyed the opium. And they basically said, no more opium. And I think the punishment for dealing opium, I'm pretty sure, was death in Qing China. And Britain got pissed about this. They're losing, their tax revenue from the opium sales. And this is the crazy thing, is Britain is technically, at this time, was one of the largest cartels in the world. Because when you think of, drug organizations, you don't think of something like a country like Britain, but that's essentially what Britain was doing. They were basically acting like, a giant cartel and trying to, muscle their way into China with the opium trade. What ended up happening was Britain declared war on China in the first Opium War. And the reason that the Chinese got destroyed really badly in the Opium Wars is because the British Navy was just so superior to the Chinese ships. They had better sails, better weapons on it, faster, more agile. The British weapons were just much more advanced than a lot of the Chinese weapons. And so the Chinese got destroyed in that war. And what ended up happening was Britain forced China into allowing these opium dealers to, basically go into China and start selling opium. So China had, China had no choice at that point. They basically had to accept that these opium dealers were going to go into China and they were going to start selling it there. And that was basically the 1842 Treaty of Nanking, which is what ended the war. But not only did that treaty also allow these opium dealers to go into China and start selling opium, what the treaty also did was it actually gave Britain control of Hong Kong Island. And this is actually a picture. This is from Wikipedia. But this basically shows you what Britain acquired. So in the first Opium War, they acquired Hong Kong Island. And Kowloon, where you're actually right now in Black Ops 1, it's actually the upper part above Hong Kong Island. So it's southern Kowloon and Stonecutters Island. That's the region where this game is taking place right now. Now, Fast forward 18 years later, you had the Second Opium War. And the Second Opium War basically happened at that point. Britain got even greedier. And now what Britain wanted is China to pretty much... China was supposed to allow these opium dealers to go into China and start selling opium. And the Chinese were not allowed to stop them. But what Britain wanted with the Second Opium War is they wanted the Chinese to basically legalize opium in their entire country. Now, China, of course, did not want this. They didn't want this dangerous drug being legalized in their country. And this led to the Second Opium War. And again, the British Navy came in, they bombed, Chinese cities like Canton, and the Chinese surrendered. The Chinese ended up losing, and this was, in China, this is considered a century of humiliation. It was considered like a really bad time period in China, where China was constantly getting humiliated by, European powers and Japan. Now, what ended up happening is, with the end of the Second Opium War, China was forced to legalize opium across the entire country, and in that treaty, the Treaty of Peking, Britain now acquired southern Kowloon and Stonecutters Island. And then what ended up happening was, in 1898, you have, 38 years later, there was another treaty, the Second Convention of Peking, Northern Kowloon and New Territories treaty, and in this treaty, basically, Britain had acquired all of the northern territories. So this is the entire region that they had basically acquired and controlled. And the treaty said that Britain was to have control of the northern territories for basically 99 years. And it was supposed to expire in 1997. Now, this is the reason that Britain actually ended up giving back Hong Kong to China. So Britain kept Hong Kong ever since the start of the First Opium War, and then, the 1842 Treaty of Nanking, Hong Kong Island, 1860 Treaty of Peking, they got Kowloon and Stonecutters Island, and then 1898, they got the Northern Territories. So Britain had managed to control a huge portion of land here in southern China. Now, in Black Ops 1, the reason that Clarke is actually hiding here is because it's a British territory at the time. So this is not controlled by, communist China yet. And because Clarke is a British communist and he was fleeing Dragovich, he probably had contacts in Hong Kong that he knew that probably hit him. That's how he got into Hong Kong. And that's probably one of the ways that Weaver and Hudson tracked him down. They were probably looking at far away British territories and where Clarke could be hiding, and then they probably narrowed it down to Hong Kong. That's how they ended up catching him. Now, moving on here about Britain basically giving back Hong Kong to China. Did Britain have to give back Hong Kong to China? There's a little bit of misinformation here. So what people don't know is the treaty that Britain had with China, the 1898 treaty. What people don't know is that the 1898 Second Convention of Peking, Northern Kowloon and New Territories Treaty, that was the treaty that gave Britain the 99-year lease, but it was a rent-free lease, controlled the northern territories of Hong Kong. Britain actually only, according to that treaty, only had to give up the northern territories. So basically, when you look at this picture, in 1997, the territories that Britain had to give up to China is they had to give up all the, light blue color. So basically, the vast majority of this. They didn't have to give back Hong Kong, and they didn't have to give back Kowloon or Stonecutters Island. So they only had to give back the northern territories, but they ended up giving back all of Hong Kong. Now, why did Britain give all of the land away? Why didn't they just give away the northern portion? The reason for that was because, for one, China did not recognize all the other treaties. China basically said that these treaties were, forced on China, in a imperialist sense, which China was right. I'm not defending the communist government of China, but China's argument technically was right that these treaties were forced on China. At that time, it was an imperialist, it was an imperialist treaty. Britain was basically forcing opium into China. And about the opium trade, here's something really messed up. When Britain was basically forcing opium into China, and they were getting so many Chinese addicted to opium, do you know where opium was actually illegal? Britain. So you were actually not allowed to buy and sell opium in Britain itself, but the British Empire was actually selling opium in China. So you see that? They don't allow opium in their country. They don't want their people getting addicted and dying from it, but then they were selling it in China. And the Japanese, what they actually did, the Japanese actually laced Japanese cigarettes with opium. They did this when they were actually invading and occupying China, and they got this idea primarily from the British. And what happened was the idea of the Japanese laced opium cigarettes is the Japanese were trying to get the Chinese more addicted to opium, and a lot of people that weren't even using opium wouldn't even know that they were using it when they would, smoke these cigarettes. So Japanese cigarette companies would manufacture these, make tons of money from it, and and guess what? Japan actually made these cigarettes illegal in Japan. So the Japanese were not allowed to smoke these opium cigarettes, but then they distributed them in China. They got the Chinese addicted, and thinking that it would get the Chinese army weak. They would not be in physical shape to fight back against Japan, and to an extent it helped. Japan's, opium cigarette campaign in China made China gradually weaker. Now, moving on here, the reason that Britain gave back all of Hong Kong, even though they only had to give back the northern territories, was because they really didn't have a choice. There really wasn't anything else they could do. Now, I'm not a defender of colonialism. I can't stand colonialism, but this is kind of a weird situation, because normally you would support, a country, decolonizing and getting rid of its colonies and giving the people, giving the land back to the country that is rightfully, historically part of it. But in this instance, what happened was, China became a communist dictatorship, and Britain, gradually became a more democratic society over time. And one of the reasons that Hong Kong has such a high population was because so many people, millions of people, actually fled from Mao Zedong. So they fled from communist China and came to Hong Kong. That's why Hong Kong's population exploded, in the 50s and the 60s. It was because of the fact that so many people who were fleeing the communists in mainland China, they came down to Hong Kong. So about Britain giving back all of Hong Kong to China, is a lot of Hong Kong's infrastructure was in the northern regions, like their power stations, for example. They had some farms there too, and so factories as well. Now, what would happen is China would take control of these northern territories. If Britain only gave back the northern territories in 1997, but they didn't give back Hong Kong, China could basically cut off these power stations and basically cut off power to Hong Kong Island itself. And they could basically blockade Hong Kong from the north and starve out Hong Kong. And what China would do is, China doesn't even need to invade Hong Kong. What they could do is they could basically blockade it from the north, and then they could do a naval blockade from the south, basically cutting off Hong Kong, and it would starve Hong Kong out. And so that's basically what would happen. And China would argue to the world that, this is rightfully our land, but while technically it is Chinese land historically, China was a brutal dictatorship, which a lot of people in Hong Kong didn't want to be part of China. So Britain basically saw it that they really had no choice. When Britain gave China back Hong Kong, it wasn't really like a giveaway ceremony. It was more of a surrender. That's essentially what it was, because Britain realized we have no chance of keeping this. China would attack. They're going to take it. They're going to blockade it. They're going to starve people out. So we have to give it back. And the idea was, we give Hong Kong to China. It will get in China's good graces. We'll develop a better relationship with China. And at the same time, as Britain forced China to sign a treaty. And the treaty basically was, for the next 50 years, that China would basically respect human rights in Hong Kong. They would respect other political parties. They would respect capitalism. And for the first few decades, China did actually respect the treaty. But then within the last few years, what actually happened was China stopped respecting the treaty. They started becoming more authoritarian in Hong Kong. They started suppressing free speech, suppressing other political parties, beating up protesters, arresting protesters. And this got so crazy that even PlayStation's terms of service has actually changed in Hong Kong, where you are not allowed to actually criticize the Communist Party of China. And this Chinese censorship also, I'm pretty sure it also applies on the Hong Kong store on PlayStation Network. So China did not keep their end of the deal with occupying the when they regained Hong Kong. So Hong Kong today is technically part of China, but it's more like its autonomous zone. Now, a lot of people get pissed at Britain for giving back Hong Kong, but like I said, is Britain illegally acquired Hong Kong. It was through imperialism and colonialism, but then it's such a weird history. It gets weird because of the fact that if China was, a democratic society, and China was not, this brutal, dictatorship that it was, it wouldn't have been such a problem giving, Hong Kong back to China. But the fact that, China, evolved and became this, brutal communist dictatorship that killed millions of people, that's basically where the controversy comes in. And it's such a weird situation because, like I said, most of the times, defending colonialism 99% of the time is wrong because it's imperialism, it's exploiting other countries. But this is one of the few times where people would actually rather live in the colony than live in the country itself. So it's like a really weird, history. but that's basically it. That's why Britain gave back Hong Kong to China, because they really had no choice. They really had no choice, and China would have attacked Hong Kong. And for people asking me, but isn't Britain part of NATO? Couldn't NATO have intervened if China had attacked Hong Kong? No. If Britain refused to give back Hong Kong and China attacked, then what would have happened is NATO would not get involved. And the reason that NATO would not have gotten involved is because when the U.S. was helping to create NATO, the U.S. was actually concerned about getting dragged into European colonial conflicts when they were forming this alliance with them. And what basically the terms of NATO said is that colonies do not apply to NATO, to the NATO Defense Treaty, and not only that, anything south of the Tropic of Cancer. The Tropic of Cancer is a line. It's a global line. Anything south of the Tropic of Cancer on the globe is not to be covered under NATO. That's why that's why NATO did not intervene in the Falklands War, even though Falklands were technically part of Britain. That's why NATO did not intervene and attack Argentina. It's because it was south of the Tropic of Cancer, so the treaty did not apply to them. But when it comes to Hong Kong, it would be argued that Hong Kong is a colony, and so therefore it is not subject to the NATO defense treaties. So that's primarily that. And the U.S. is right in forcing European countries to accept that, because so many European countries still had their colonial empires they wanted to hold on to. Belgium had the Congo, France had Algeria, Portugal had Angola. And so a lot of these countries would end up having civil wars and conflicts, and the U.S. did not want to have any part in that. So it was actually good that the NATO treaty does not actually apply to colonies, because the U.S. would have been dragged into so many, disputes and wars in for European colonial powers. But that's basically it. That's basically the history of Hong Kong and, what ended up happening to it. So personally, I don't really blame Britain for giving away Hong Kong to China, because we look at it as a bad decision, but Britain really had no choice. There was really nothing else they could have done. It's either they give it back to Hong Kong and they hope that the Chinese respect human rights, or they basically get into a war, which they're not going to win. So, Britain would not have won that war. They would not have won a war against China. So that's basically it. That's the backstory about that. Now, about Black Ops 1. Where's Black Ops 1 taking place? Black Ops 1 is taking place in a place called Kowloon, Walled City, which it's kind of weird. It's in Hong Kong, but it's technically considered its own city. And about the Walled City, this is what it looks like. The Walled City had, I think, between 40 to 50,000 people that actually lived there. The Walled City does not actually exist anymore. It was actually torn down in the late 1990s, and it was actually replaced with a park. So today there's a park. As for the people that lived there, the people that had lived there had gotten compensated. Some people got more than others, but a lot of them had gotten compensated and had gotten relocated. Now, why was Walled City torn down? The Walled City, how it was a really weird situation, because neither Britain nor China controlled it. What happened was the Walled City, it was originally a military base for the Qing dynasty. So in the 1898 treaty, the Qing dynasty said, we want a military base in the area where the Walled City is, and Britain agreed to that. Now, what happened was Britain actually later, a few years later, invaded that same military base. But what happened was they discovered that the Qings had actually abandoned it, so the Qings weren't even doing anything there. And over time, what happened was this piece of land where this abandoned military base was, you had these big apartment buildings and shacks and shanties that were basically built up over time there. And this basically turned into a giant slum. That's basically what the Walled City was. It was this giant, really rundown series of apartment buildings and shacks, shanties that thousands of people had lived in. Like 40 to 50,000 people had lived there, and these people had lived in these apartments basically called cage. They were nicknamed like cage apartments because these apartments were like so tiny. And Hong Kong still has some of these apartments that exist today, like these really tiny apartments, but the vast majority of them were really common in the Walled City. And about these apartments is these apartments had really bad conditions. They didn't have proper ventilation. They had pipes hadn't worked. There wasn't clean water coming into a lot of these apartments. They were very cramped. There was a lack of ventilation, lack of windows in these places. Everybody was in such cramped conditions. And so if you had a shootout like in the if you had a shootout in a place like the Walled City, a lot of people would die because so many people are into such close quarters. So like what you're seeing in the game, it's not like that. Is like you would be seeing so many more people. You see a few civilians running around, but in reality, there would just be so many more people. And I will tell you this, it's a miracle It's a miracle that the walled city actually did not collapse, because it was barely held together. It was such poor building material. It's shacks and shanties on top of each other, building up this huge, a series of apartment buildings. It's a miracle that did not collapse. That somehow that stayed together for so long. But when Kowloon City, when the walled city was basically torn down, the government had to do it. They were, it's messed up. It's messed up forcing people out of their homes. It is messed up. I agree with that. But they had to get rid of that area. And the reason they had to get rid of that area is because it was basically a disaster waiting to happen. Something was going to go wrong. If a fire started in that area, because like I said, it was a very close area, so many people were living in such close proximity to each other, it would have killed thousands of people. If a fire spread out there, and it's a miracle that this didn't, that a giant fire like that. There were a few fires that happened, but nothing that like engulfed the place. But an entire fire could have done a lot of damage. There could have been, a floor could have fallen, and the entire thing could have collapsed, and you could have had thousands of people stuck under rubber. Thousands of people could have died. And about the plane that's actually coming in, the plane coming in is actually very important, and that's realistic. That plane is actually going to Kai-Tak Airport, which Kai-Tak Airport does not exist. It was actually anymore. It was closed down in the late 1990s, right after the walled city. The airport was actually right next to the walled city, so planes would actually fly right over the walled city, right over the walled city when they were taking off, and lowering as they were landing towards the airport. And what would happen is the people that were actually living there, they would experience such huge amounts of noise pollution. Like, you would not be able to sleep. You wouldn't be able to rest. The large planes flying over, day and night, people would not be able to relax. They wouldn't be able to sleep. And on top of that, whenever the planes would fly over, it would just shake these shanties. So it would shake these buildings. And because, like I said, it's like such poor material that it was constructed and built up, shacks and shanties would fall, and it could lead to a giant disaster. And imagine if there was a plane crash. If a plane was flying, too low, and it actually scraped the building and had actually crashed, you could have had thousands of people that could have died. So the city needed to be destroyed. It needed to be demolished, because it was a giant health hazard, and it was just a disaster waiting to happen. I'm telling you, if that city had been allowed to stay up, something would have happened. Something bad. It would have either collapsed, there would have been a fire, something really bad. And additionally, about the city, another thing I'll say about it is, a lot of these apartments were so small that people actually did not have kitchens in their apartments. So they didn't have a way to cook their food. So what people would do is they would just eat out all the time. And there was even like restaurants actually like opened up, like small like restaurants opened up in this part of the city. So they had like their own stores and restaurants, but people would eat out a lot of times, and the food that people would eat out, it was not very healthy. So people also were not very healthy that lived there. It was like massive absolute poverty. And the 14K triads and the Sun Yi-on triad were actually started there. And the triads had actually ruled that area. So Britain and China didn't control it. The triads ran it. It was basically a triad country. When you think about country run by the triads, that's basically what the walled city was. It was a slum that was run by the triads. And the reason even though the Hong Kong police technically had jurisdiction there, the reason the Hong Kong police did not like going in there, because it's such cramped conditions, and because there's so many people in there, is that they were scared they could get jumped, they could get beat up and killed. So that's why cops largely stayed out of the walled city. They did not want to go in there. They were basically scared of confrontation with the triads. And also, here's a fun fact for you: in Sleeping Dogs, the 18K and the Sun on Yi are based on the 14K and the Sun Yi on. That's the triad organizations they're based on. But basically, the triads ran that place, and it needed to go. It basically needed to get taken down. But that's basically it. I hope that you guys enjoyed this bit of history of me explaining about Hong Kong, and maybe you learned something new. But I hope that you enjoyed my little discussion here. Let's continue on with the mission here. So again, you see this? You see how close the planes were? That's actually how close they were to the walled city.
Check the roof.
I'm pretty sure there's a dragon up. Oh yeah, here it is.
You gotta be kidding me!
what you need. They'll be here before you know it.
You're very well prepared for a dead man.
Just because I accept the inevitability of my fate does not mean I'm in any hurry to embrace it.
Whatever you say, English.
This, the G11, I don't think this gun was actually made in the late 60s. This is a German prototype rifle, but it never entered full production because of how expensive it was and complicated. And the really weird thing about the G11, it fires a caseless cartridge. A cartridge that actually doesn't have a case in it. It's weird.
Target down. Держись, товарищ.
Okay, on me.
So again, this is what the walled city looked like. Very close, cramped conditions.
Уничтожи!
And some apartments were even tinier than this.
Flashbang!
How did I get flashed?
You are hit? Я подражаю! They're breaching the windows! Он у меня на мушке! Он мой! He's dead! Санитара! Меняю, стреляй!
Which way?
Left door! Onto the rooftops! You sure you know where you're going? I'm prepared for this.
Soundtrack in this mission is really good.
Держи в поле зрения! Товарища ранило! Вот они! Говорит, сделаю! Да я его накрыл! Я вижу, это я! Он был в поле зрения! Раненый! Давай на поражение! Вот он! Вот он! Он у меня на мушке! Накрой! Огонь! Направление! Сделай! Идет! Раненый! Пистолет! Вас понял! Держи в поле зрения! Санитар, сюда! Target down! Он у меня прицелен! Contact down! Подбежаю! Граната к бою! Санитар, сюда!
Oh, it's Clarke, okay.
Черт! Бойца ранило! Он ранен! Вижу их! Я его вижу! Держу их огнем! Идут! Вас понял! Ой! Вот он! Да я его накрыл! Second floor! Contact! Вот сюда! Меняю! Стреляй! Давай на поражение! Говорит, сделаю! Вот туда! Держи в поле зрения! Скоро его не будет! Сейчас гранатой! Накрой! Уничтожи! Держись, товарищ! He's down! Вот он есть! Я его вижу! Понял! Я вижу! Это я! Прикрой меня! Он не делает! Санитара! Ой, санитара! Сюда! Вот туда!
This mission is actually very difficult too. Also, if you notice, Clarke is actually voiced by Gary Oldman, the same guy who actually voices Reznov.
2 more assholes below.
No problem. I got him.
Dragovich is going to a lot of trouble to shut you up. What are you not telling us? I told you about Nova 6. Where is their base? Nam? Laos? Cambodia? His home turf. The Ural Mountains. Yamato. That's where you'll find Steiner. In his final preparations for Project Nova.
What else? Whispers, rumors, anything.
Steiner talked with Dragovich about numbers.
What kind of numbers?
The kind that their plan relies on. Enemy! 12 o'clock, glow!
Whoa, what the? What did I just get blown up by? You gotta be kidding me. That's...
The kind that their plan relies on. Glow!
Tango down! Contact down!
Shit! They've sent in a cleanup crew to steal what's left of my research. Well, no, thank you, Dragovich. I can clean up my own mess. Either of you too low on ammo? We still have a ways to go. This way!
Oh, and
Я вижу, это я! Вот они! Нужен доктор! Поддержаю! Граната к бою! Ты прикрой! Прикрой меня! Перезарядиться! Вижу их! Он у меня прицелы! Уничтожи! Удерживай их огнем! Я его вижу! Прицелую! Огонь в направлении! Много целей! Дозорки! Вот туда! Заряда! Сюда! Я подражаю! Не нужно заряжаться! Я вижу! Это я! Я их вижу! Вот они! Меняю, стреляй! Вас понял! Понятно! Поле зрения! Уничтожи! Вот они! Поддержаю! Вот он! Он мой! Много целей! There! On the roof! Удерживай их огнем! Он у меня прицелы! Прикрой меня! Перезарядиться!
damn, the enemies are really annoying on this mission.
Скорее! Я подражаю! Меняю, стреляй! Я их вижу! Вот они! Я вижу! Это я! Уничтожи! Я их вижу! Легко! Сделаю! Он в моем поле зрения! Он не жилет! Искать! Много целей! Он ранен! Вижу их! Да! Ты дурак! Он у меня прицел! Меняю магазин! Это меня враг! Хорошо! Сделаю! Скоро его не будет! Я вижу! Это я! Давай на поражение! Вот туда! Уничтожи! Легко! Раненые! Он не жилет! Держи в поле зрения! Меняю, стреляй! Да я его накрыл! Он мой! Он в моем поле зрения! Вот он! Кибера! Он у меня прицелы! Не высовывайся! Мы сейчас! Я их вижу! Я подражаю! Скоро его не будет! Сделаю! Давай на поражение! Легко! Он прав! Раненый! Закрой их! Вон они! Да я его накрыл! Valkyrie on the left! Он в моем поле зрения! Подтверждай! Раненый! Вот он! Target down!
Damn.
You getting shut up! Залета!
Tango down!
You're taking fire!
Санитар, сюда!
That thermal scope definitely helps so much.
Follow the hallway, all the way to the end. They're breaching the roof! Contact down!
Бойца ранило! Огонь в направлении! Вот он!
Onto the next balcony! Back outside! Balcony on your right!
Ранены!
Скоро его не будет! Бросаю гранату! Он у меня прицелен! Вас понял! Он в моем поле зрения! Да, вот туда! Накрой их! Курит сделаю! Я трачу обоймы за обоймы! Понял!
Санитар, сюда!
Not far now! Weapons and ammunition! Grab what you need!
Oh, poop.
Spetsnaz inbound! Watch my back! I need to unlock this door! Cover me while I get this door open! Okay. It's been a while.
Oh, it's the damnedest thing.
Он у меня на
Got your own
54.
combination?
23. Oh, 5.
What is it?
11.
Я их вижу!
19.
Target down!
45.
Нужен доктор! Lucky 7! Удерживай их огнем! Come on! Just one more leap of faith! I got you! What about the numbers, Clarke? Oh yes!
Он прав!
Я побежаю! There's the key to... Вас понял!
Понял!
Я их вижу! Он труп! Так точно!
Подтверждай!
Fuck! Let's go! Tugboat, this is Red Eye! Immediate extraction! Street level, Tower 4, south side!
Roger, Red Eye. On the way. Been watching the fireworks down here. Did you snatch the asset?
Damn. Oh man, getting yeah, just that's the thing about this mission is there's so many people shooting at you from different angles.
Immediate extraction! Street level, Tower 4, south side!
Roger, Red Eye. On the way. Been watching the fireworks down here. Did you snatch the asset?
Negative. He's dead. Red Eye out. Come on, Hudson. I see a way down. This way.
Черт! Бойца ранило!
Damn, I hate how you take so much damage when falling from each part.
Держи в поле зрения! Раненый! Он в моем поле зрения!
Where are we headed?
Clarke ID'd a Nazi scientist working for Dragovich. His name's Steiner. We're going to Russia, Mount Yamantau.
We know that Jason Hudson briefed you.
Okay, guys, so I guess we'll wrap it up here. Thank you guys for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed this part. If you did, drop a like, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day, guys.